A warm welcome to all of you, especially our visitors who are from out of town. We want you to know that the weather is always like this in Chicago. So please hurry back. It's good to have you here. As I mentioned at the outset of Mass, we're so very pleased to have representatives from almost 100 parishes throughout the Archdiocese who work in a very diligent way to combat domestic violence. And in fact, this month, in which we mark the outreach that we do and the awareness that we bring, I want to, in a special way at this Mass, encourage all of you who work so very hard in your parishes and invite all of us to become a part of this very important work and ministry in the life of the Church. It is important, I think, to lift you up, to encourage you, because sometimes the work is not easy, especially as you come across broken lives, those whose lives have been shattered, where they're living in the shadows and so often ignored. It is because of your ministry that you give them courage to step forward, to have help, to realize that there are people who care. But it's also a day for all of us to consider how this important ministry should be a part of the ongoing ministry of the Church. It is a threefold ministry. You bring awareness to the problem. By holding up your signs as you did at the beginning of the Mass, you identify and almost in a way call out those who suffer from domestic violence to let them know that there are people who care. But there's also the important work of outreach to people, to give them the means by which they can take the next step in their life and have some courage in their hearts to improve the situation. So often those who suffer from domestic violence live in the shadows simply because they're afraid. They think no one will listen to them, or maybe because they know that it will be very risky, perhaps leaving behind financial security, even if the home is filled with violence. And then also, we work in prevention to make sure that this cycle of violence in the home doesn't continue. Because we know that the violence on the streets that we suffer and that we see, especially here in the city of Chicago, begins so often in the home. It's a spillover from what's taking place in families where people learn patterns of domination, control, and power. But also where children are exposed so often to violence in the home that they begin to learn patterns of how they deal with tension, conflict, to the point that violence seems to be the only way forward. That prevention, that breaking of the cycle of violence is so very important in the work that we do. Because what it tells us all is that we all have the potential to be violent. We all have within us the deep, dark spirits that maybe want us to strike out in anger. And so by helping each other along the way, we help also those who perpetrate violence as a way of breaking that cycle. It's an important work. The statistics are staggering. I've been told that here in Chicago, 550 911 calls a day occupy our police force because of domestic violence. We also know that recent studies show that 1 in 4 college girls will be sexually assaulted during their college years. It affects all sorts of people, even at the junior high and high school level, where women especially are easy prey to those who bring violence to those relationships. That has a numbing effect on people's lives, where people who are victimized by that kind of violence turn to alcohol and drug abuse, even taking their lives, where they also find themselves so battered down that they have no hope. Years ago, when I was working in South Dakota, I was visiting with a group of Native American young ladies who were victims of domestic violence. And as part of their dreaming about how their lives can be better, there was an exercise in asking them What did they really want to make about their lives if they could change? Where would they want to be in 5 years? And so I asked the question to this circle of young women. Where do you want to be in 5 years? No one said anything. So I said, okay, 3 years. Where would you like to be? What would you like to say about yourself in 3 years? Again, dead silence. Finally, I said, okay, a year from now, what would you like to say about your life? And finally, a young girl raised her hand and said, a year from now, I'd like to say that I'm still alive. I'm still alive. Domestic violence beats people down to the point where they feel their lives don't count and have no value. Today we're given in the scripture a story of that aspect of human life where people do feel beat down. We have this man Zacchaeus. We're told that he is jostled about in the crowd. He can't see Jesus because he's of small stature. He is someone, even though he's successful, who's shunned, who's put aside. Yes, domestic violence doesn't happen just in homes where there is poverty and a lack of opportunity. It can happen in the homes of those who are wealthy, those who have many opportunities in life. And so Zacchaeus, because he sees something about the hope that Jesus gives, wants to take the next step in his life. He wants to step up, and so he climbs that sycamore tree. All of you who work in your parishes to bring about awareness of domestic violence, who bring about healing, to give people hope, are like that voice of Christ, who give people the hope to take a step up, to be able to take the risk of, as he does, going out on a limb, even if it means that they will give up their security, their financial security. The U.S. bishops issued a beautiful pastoral letter in 1992 about all of this, and it was revised 10 years later. It was called When I Call for Help. And they wrote a sentence in there that we really want to make sure is emphasized. We must state as strongly and clearly as we can, it said, that violence against women inside or outside the home is never justified and is a sin and often a crime. And we must emphasize that no one is expected to stay in an abusive marriage. These words can be very liberating to people, to give them hope, to take a step out into the future, to be able in some way to take the risk of leaving behind violence. And all of you are that voice of Christ, giving them encouragement to step forward. And then something also very miraculous happens to Zacchaeus. The Lord does recognize him. And not only does he commend him for his faith, but he says to him, I want to go to your home. I'm going to dine with you tonight. That, I think, is the impact that we wish we can have with regard to our domestic violence issues. We want to assure people in their homes that things can get better, that their lives don't have to be filled with turmoil and violence and the tension of beating others up or abusing them sexually, but rather transformation can take place because we as a church are that presence of Christ in their lives to bring about transformation and change. It's so very important for all of us to keep in mind that this is a problem so often that lives in the shadows of society, lives in the shadow of our neighborhoods and in our families. It is important to allow the sunshine to come into those areas to bring about healing. It is important for us to encourage those who are suffering from domestic violence so that they will get the help they need, but also that society will break the cycle of violence that we suffer from. And so today, not only do I commend you and encourage you for what you're doing, but I ask all of us to be aware that this important ministry is at the heart of what we do as church. It is the voice of Christ calling out to those who feel they don't count, that they're forgotten, that they don't matter. The voice of Christ to tell them to take the step up, to take a risk, but also to allow their homes to be transformed, that brings peace and a sense of charity that only the church that Christ knows how to give.